Hi everyone, it's Laura here and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video I'm going to show you how I combined die cut and hit emboss sentiments to create two cards with products by HappyDoodle. For my first card I used this die. This is the Thanks Happy Cut by HappyDoodle Stamps. I combined it with the Wingman stamp set and with the Unbelievable stencil, and these are all products from the June 2018 release, and I also combined them with this die set which was previously released and is called Clover Frame Dies. So let's have a look at how I created my first card. To begin with, I cut some Bristol Smooth cardstock by Strathmore with the stitched rectangle die in the HappyDoodle Clover Frame dies, and I will be doing some ink blending with distress inks. I am using Peacock Feathers, Mermaid Lagoon and Blueprint Sketch, and I'm blending them in a circular pattern in order to get an ombre effect. I started with Peacock Feathers in the center, moved on to Mermaid Lagoon all around it, and now I am finishing blending with Blueprint Sketch over the edges of my panel. And I will keep adding layers and blending the inks together until I get the result I'm happy with. I am then going to add detail to the background using the HappyDoodle Unbelievable stencil and Nuvo Mousse in citrus green. I worked the mousse with the spatula at first to soften it up a little bit, and then I'll be applying it over the whole background. And as I'm doing this, I wanted to let you know that I created today's cards as part of a blog hop to celebrate HappyDoodle's first birthday. There is a lot of inspiration by many talented crafters, prizes to be won and some treats as well, so once you're done watching this video, I suggest that you visit my blog, which will be linked in the description box down below, to find out more about the hop and the giveaways as well. But now let's go back to the card. Once I am done applying the mousse, I will carefully remove the stencil and immediately wash it under the sink with some warm water and mild soap to remove the excess Nuvo Mousse from the stencil and from the spatula as well, and then I can put my background aside to dry. In the meantime, I can work on my images. I stamped a few from the HappyDoodle Wingman stamp set, which was released in June together with most of the HappyDoodle products I'm using today, and I used Memento Tuxedo Black ink and Nina Solar White cardstock because I want to color my images with Spectrum Noir markers. And I will be showing the coloring for this one bird only because I used the same colors and techniques on the other one too, and I don't want this video to be too long. So for the body of the bird, I am using shades of red, and I am adding the shadows as if the light is coming from the top right corner, so that the shadow areas will be mostly focused on the bottom left part of the image. And for the wings and the tail, I used different colors, starting from red and going all the way to blue, to try and reproduce the colorful look of the wings of the scarlet macaw. So for the part of the wings and of the tail that are closer to the body, I used some reds. I then moved on to oranges and yellows, followed by greens, and finally for the tip of the wings and of the tail, I will be using some blues. I am trying to overlap the different colors to get a nice transition, and off camera I also used the colorless blender to soften up the colors even more. You will find a color table on my blog, which will be linked in the description box down below, where I will list all the markers that I used for the images in today's cards, in case you want to use that as a reference. This is something new that I introduced on my blog just recently, so I would love for you to let me know if you find this useful or if you prefer that I list the colors directly on screen. I then moved on to the parrot's face, which I wanted to keep white, so I just added a bit of shading with some warm grays. And for the beak, I used some darker grays to add shadows and add dimension. I also went ahead of camera and colored one more bird, and at this point this is what I have ready. So I have my two colorful parrots and my background. And it's time to start working on the sentiment. I used the new HappyDoodle Thanks Happy Cut to cut some white cardstock, and I did it 3 times so that I could stack the 3 die-cut sentiments on top of each other and get a nice dimensional thanks for my card. And I'm gluing them together with Nuvo Deluxe adhesive, making sure that they're nicely lined up. I then used 2 of the sentiments in the Wingman stamp set, one that reads "Thanks for always" and the other one that reads "Standing by me." I masked off the word thanks from the first sentiment. I stamped both of them with Versamark ink on some black cardstock, coated them with white embossing powder, this is by Ranger, and then I melted the embossing powder with my heat gun. Before gluing everything down on my background, I decided that it needed a little bit more contrast, so I decided to sponge the edges with Distress ink in Black Soot. I am going around all 4 edges, making sure to add just a little bit so that the background doesn't end up being too dark, and also trying not to get harsh edges. And then I can go ahead and start putting my card together. I used some foam squares to glue the parrots down onto my background so that they would be raised at the same level as the thanks die cut. And I am using some Nuvo Deluxe adhesive for the word thanks and also for the sentiment strips, helping me place them down with my tweezers. And then as an extra detail, I added 2 yellow feathers to the top right of my background using again Nuvo Deluxe adhesive and my Pick Me Up tool. I then mounted everything on a top folding A2 card base, and this finished off my first card. For my second card, I used some more products from the June release. I used the Sending Happy Cuts and the Yappy Happy Mail stamp set, which is absolutely adorable. And I combined them with the Clover Frame dies, which I also used on my previous card. So let's have a look at how I created this one. As a first step, I used the stitched rectangle die in the Clover Frame set to cut down some white cardstock, and then I created my own patterned paper. I used Memento Dewdrops in Toffee Crunch to repeatedly stamp this parcel image from the Yappy Happy Mail stamp set. I am changing the position and the orientation of the image so that the pattern looks as random as possible. And I am also stamping some of the images partially off the edges of the paper, as this conveys the feeling of patterned paper even more. I will cover the entire panel, and then I will use one of the smaller images in the set to fill in the empty areas, again changing the orientation so that I get a random look. And I can see at this point that there are a couple of images that I didn't stamp perfectly, but I will not worry about it now, and I will try to disguise it later. Once I was done with the stamping, I used another die in the HappyDoodle Clover Frames die set to cut a window on my panel that I will use to frame up the little scene I will be building. And to create the background for my scene, I did some ink blending with Distress Oxides, and I used Broken China for the sky and Pewt Paint for the grass. And I did some very quick ink blending, not worrying too much about the area where the two colors meet, because this will be mostly hidden. And then I also added some water droplets for an extra detail. I then moved on to my images, which I stamped with Memento ink in Toffee Crunch on some Nina Solar White cardstock and colored with my Spectrum Noir markers. This time I used a more muted palette because I wanted a different feeling on this card compared to the card I created in the first part of this video. And again, I will not show all the coloring to keep this video short, but you can find a color chart on my blog with the lists of markers I used for this card too. So if you wanna check that out, visit the link in the description box down below. And as I do more often than not, I am adding shading as if the light comes from the top right of the screen, so that the darker areas will be mostly on the bottom left part of the images. And this is how they look once they're all colored in. For my sentiment, I used again a die cut word, for which I used the Sending Heavy Cut, and I combined that with a heat embossed sentiment that I took from the Yappy Happy Mail stamp set. And I chose them so that together they read "Sending a card full of hugs." I then moved on and started assembling my card. I used the same die that I used to cut the opening on my front panel to die cut a frame that I will inlay in the window itself. I will then tuck the mailbox just behind the frame and add the little poodle just right in front of the mailbox, and place the letter in his paws so that it looks like he's sending some happy mail. I used Nuvo Deluxe adhesive to adhere the sentiment to my card front, and for a finishing touch I colored 3 more postcards like the ones I have on my background, and I am now gluing them on the background itself, overlapping them to the ones that I had previously stamped for a little bit of a pop of color. And using these images and the sentiment strip also allowed me to hide the stamping mistakes so that no one will ever know. I am mounting my card front on an A2 card base, and this finishes off my second card for today. And here you can see them both once again. And you can see how combining heat embossed and die cut sentiments creates a lot of emphasis on the sentiments themselves, so that you don't need to add a lot of elements to create interest on your cards. Also, don't forget that I created these cards as part of a blog hop to celebrate Heffy Doodle's first birthday, so make sure you visit my blog for all the details about the giveaways that are going on and for links to the other blogs where you can find plenty of inspiration. And that's it for today. If you guys enjoyed this video, please let me know in the comments below, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. You can visit my blog for the full list of supplies, and I'll catch you guys soon with the next one. Ciao!